What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Web3 with a Splash of Wine podcast, where we talk about blockchain technology, DeFi, NFTs, and all kinds of other Web3 vibes. This show is for entertainment purposes only, and nothing said on the podcast should be taken as financial or legal advice. Let's dive into it. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Web3 with a Splash of Lime podcast. This is your host Z, founder of LeagueDAO, part of LimeChain, and today I have Jake Craven from LeagueDAO. Jake is one of the pioneers in the Web3 fantasy sports game, and it's absolute joy to have him here with me to talk all about fantasy sports, Web3, right in the heat of it, just after the Super Bowl, just before March Madness and all of that stuff. So exciting times, and welcome to the show, Jake.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Excited to talk.
Awesome. Let's dive straight into it. We usually start the show with a short intro of our guest. So would be amazing if you give an intro of yourself, basically your background and how you get into Web3 and crypto.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So I, as you mentioned, one of the founders of LeagueDAO, and prior to LeagueDAO, I've been working in the Web3 crypto space since about 2017. And prior to LeagueDAO, I've been working at company Singularity TV, and a lot of my experience comes from working in the entertainment industry. So specifically around independent film. I started my career as an attorney. So I studying entertainment law, but specifically, when I was even in law school studying this, spent, full classes and semesters breaking down traditional entertainment contracts. And, the one glaring thing is that they are incredibly convoluted and confusing, and the entire industry is set up to basically, take it, whether or not it's malicious or not, but to take advantage of creators. And so I decided that I wanted to focus my career and my energy on how technology can be used to support independent creators. So I went and worked at a Web2 startup. This was back in 2012. And it was almost like Kickstarter for seeing movies in theaters. And distributed a lot of films in theaters and worked with a lot of creators. But the big thing that we did was we had this sort of ticketing platform, and we were collecting all of the data of who was buying tickets to see an independent movie in a movie theater. And unlike every other ticketing platform who just keeps that data, we started giving that information to the creators. And that opened up sort of a whole other world of what happens when you allow creators to control that information and to actually have a direct connection with their audience, and understand who it is that is participating or watching their films, and creating campaigns where you're going back and building relationships with that audience. Where for the legacy industry, there's just complete cutoff and divide, and independent creators don't have any clue who's actually, who their fans are and things like that. So that you can kind of see how that paralleled into Web3, because more interesting to me than, booking movies in theaters and things like that was how information can be used and how information can be powerful. And that was around the time that I started really diving into Web3 and cryptocurrency. And that was when I made the move from the company I had been at to Singularity TV and helped them build out their decentralized or tokenized video on demand platform. And just stayed there, continuing to work and build out tools around rights management software, and looking at how tokenization can be used to give creators more control over their royalties and create more transparency in a very murky industry. And it was around, I mean, I would say maybe 2020, like August 2020, that I had a conversation with Tyler Ward about, I think it happened to coincide, was doing a lot of work in building a platform, and leading a team of devs, but also had happened to have discovered or uncovered my dad's collection of old baseball cards from the 80s, and started to kind of think about that. And at the same time, like we were sort of in the midst of DeFi summer, right? And I think
Yep.
there was a lot of focus on that, and we were putting a lot of energy into DeFi, but then also we were starting to talk about NFTs in a different way, right? Like it wasn't just
Yep.
CryptoKitties. And I was, really interested in, okay, you have NFTs, how do we put utility to NFTs, right? Like how do we do something more with them than them just being collectibles? And that's where, Tyler and I were just sort of shooting the shit and started talking about, oh, well, like sports and football. Because also August is when football starts getting going. And so we were both excited about football. So, that conversation sort of sparked this kind of larger idea that ended up becoming LeagueDAO. That was a
Well,
long intro.
no, I love it. Appreciate the whole story, and I love the journey from an attorney to basically true entertainment all the way to Web3 fantasy sports. How does obviously most people that are listening to the show are familiar with NFTs. We all know the whole craze with like the collectibles, profile pictures, avatars, whatnot. But how does Web3 fit into fantasy sports, which is fantasy sports in the basically sports entertainment and hasn't been tied to NFTs or Web3 recently? How does Web3 fit into all of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because when we talk about like Web3 integrating into fantasy sports, what we're really talking about is not just like NFTs. We're talking about this combination of NFTs and DeFi and how
Yep.
the two can be applied together. And I think that's also was what was sort of exciting to me, because the core, when you play fantasy sports, you're putting in a lot of time and energy to build the perfect roster. You spend 18 weeks out of the year just daily, going over this player, that player, like, doing the best you can to actually win in fantasy and to create a great team. And there are these concepts of keeper leagues where, at the end of the season, the team doesn't just go away. You kind of keep some of the players, but use them for the next season. But even then, there are a couple big inefficiencies with fantasy, like Web2 fantasy sports. One is you put in all this time and energy in, and at the end of the season, the team's gone, right? You have to start over from scratch. So you don't actually control your team. You don't own your team. And then even with that, like, you have teams and you're playing in leagues, but it's usually just a couple friends, and and then you have to, like, someone has to chase down the dues, who's paying the, like, even just like a small pool, like who's collecting the money, and then who's actually getting paid out, who's the winner. Oftentimes, right, you have disputes might come up over a certain thing, and then you're hoping that whichever friend is the commissioner handles it, and a lot of it is very, like, relying on the trust of different people, and that in itself is problematic. But also, in a lot of ways with fantasy, you kind of end up relying on being a group of friends that you can be in a league with, and that in itself is limiting because not everyone really has that. So those sort of things, if you think, I kind of see, like, any industry that relies on on trust is poised for disruption via Web3, right?
For sure.
And implementing systems that create trustlessness. And then I think the other aspect where NFTs come in is when you something that, like gaming, it's changed the model so that you actually own what you're using. If you're putting time and energy and skill into this, you should own it. And so that's where those were sort of the paths that we sort of dove down, with looking at fantasy sports and how Web3 could be applied to fantasy.
Absolutely, I'm with you there, and I definitely think that basically the trustlessness of Web3 and the DeFi element in terms of pooling funds together, I think they're a perfect fit for fantasy sports. Now that we have that background, can you give us the rundown on what you guys are building at LeagueDAO and how does it all tie together?
Yeah, so LeagueDAO, the core model that sort of powers everything that we do is like decentralized or tokenized fantasy leagues, and this doesn't necessarily have to be sports, right? Fantasy
Mhm.
gaming extends to esports. There are fantasy like bachelor pools and things like that. If you will watch the show The Bachelor, and but the core model is there are two big, or I would say three big components to this. The first one is tokenizing the actual players. So instead of you just have like a team of players that are just being stored on a database somewhere, that's associated with your account, each player, athlete, or team is minted as their own dynamic NFT. So when you build your team, you actually own that team, and you can hold on to those players forever and continue to use them year after year, or you can go and sell them. So if you happen to draft a rookie who's having surprising year, and all of a sudden there's an appreciation in the value of that player, then you can go and sell the player. You actually control and own that. So there's that component. There's a DeFi element where we the what you're competing for is a share of a prize pool, where you're actually able to earn. In the current leagues, it's DAI. You're earning DAI based on how your players are performing, and we've built out a model. I sometimes refer to it as like ultrasound play to earn, where instead of you're just earning like our token, right, which a lot of play to earn apps do, right, and I think that's great, but it also isn't necessarily sustainable long term,
Yeah.
right, where they're basically paying for that or subsidizing it. What we've done is created a reward pool model where we're using DeFi, and the funds that are collected from people buying their player tokens is actually staked in a yield generating DeFi protocol, and it's the yield that's generated by that pool each week that gets paid out as rewards to all the participants based on how their players perform. So what that means is the reward pool does not dwindle, right? It doesn't go away. It actually just builds and continues to grow. So the numbers might have been smaller for the first season, but it's going to continue to compound and then grow for the next season when there's another player draft, and so over time it's going to get bigger and bigger, and that sustains this like what we call like the ultimate keeper league, where again, as long as a player is still playing in the NFL, you can, or whatever league sport, you can continue to use them year after year. And now we have a more sustainable model that can continue to grow, and that's better suited for decentralization too, because it doesn't require us going out and raising money each time we have a new season. So there's that component, and then the third is basically the infrastructure behind it all, and that's really the Oracle built that take the off-chain sports data and brings them on-chain, and then updates each player token and the league to inform who scored what points, who gets what rewards, and like the strategies around those contracts. So that in itself is very such an important part, because being able, the amount of data that we are processing each week with fantasy sports is pretty massive. So having an Oracle and being able to move that data on chain, so it actually is, like I said, decentralized, right? And we're not just sort of manually updating, stuff. That's just like a big component that Web3, that was big for what we built. So all of those things have sort of guide our protocols and what we build. So we've launched a fantasy football league, and we're soon to be launching a fantasy basketball league where it is, we call them the Nomo leagues. But those are where you're, tokenized individual players. You draft, you buy those players, you stake them in the league, and based on how those players perform, you earn a share of the prize pool for that week, or the prizes for that week. So at the end of the week, you claim your share of the prizes. We also are building a more of a tournament like bracket app we call it non-fungible brackets, that we're going to be launching for the NCAA basketball tournament. That again uses the same core structure of tokenization, and the rewards mechanism and the infrastructure right behind the scenes to capture another sort of form of the like fantasy gaming experience, which is kind of more bracket type competitions.
Nice. And how would that work in practice? Obviously, you mentioned the two different formats that you guys have. So those are, first we have the leagues. Um, if I'm not mistaken, there was the already one season passed with the last football season. That was a success. You're looking to basically enable the basketball and the hockey leagues next. And then the second format would be the brackets. You mentioned that the first format is based on player performance and rewards pool around that. How would the brackets work in terms of rewards and basically fetching data as well?
Yeah. So the bracket type tournaments are a little bit different from, well, one from a reward standpoint, but also in terms of what you're actually tokenizing, right? So what's being tokenized is you're filling out a bracket, right? You're picking which teams are going to win and make it through to the end, or individuals, because you can also be applied to like, tennis tournaments or golf tournaments or things like that. And what you're minting is the completed bracket. So you fill out a bracket. Each pick that you make that's correct, you earn a point. And so you're not necessarily picking, it's not based on the performance of one individual, it's the performance of the bracket as a whole. And then the prizes is also different because it's, the big difference with the bracket tournament is really the duration. I think that's kind of the big, what changes it. So for the other fantasy leagues we have, like fantasy football, fantasy basketball, fantasy hockey, those are season long. So they're, you're owning these players for the full season of, 20, 25 weeks, whatever it is. And because of that, the sort of more DeFi kind of model is suited because that there's enough time to generate yield off of the reward pool. And also we need it to like continue because you own this team, you own this player. We need that to keep, you to be able to earn revenue off of that player the next season. We can't deplete that. With the bracket tournaments, it's really best suited for these more compressed competitions and sporting events where take place over a smaller period of time, and next year's tournament is going to have a completely different set of teams that are going to be in the tournament. So there isn't that same like interoperability between, you can't just have one bracket that you use year after year because they change, right? Like the slots every year. So there isn't that like staking and yield mechanism with the our non-fungible brackets. It's more people buy in, and the funds that are collected makes up the prize pool, and the prizes are distributed based on which brackets score the most points. So for things like the NCAA men's basketball tournament, that works really well. You think next fall, right? You have the World Cup. It's well suited for that. So it's it's a very distinct type of gaming experience than the more season long fantasy sports where it's hyper focused on like individual player stats.
Got it. Got it, and I think this makes all the sense. And I think both formats obviously fit great into most of the major sports tournaments. So obviously, the leagues apply to basically every sports league, and then the brackets could be for the major tournaments, whether it's the NCAA March Madness, whether it's the World Cup for soccer and stuff like that. What's really interesting for me listening to all of this is, and I think you kind of touched based on it when you were giving the rundown on LeagueDAO in terms of infrastructure. Are you guys looking to open this up in kind of like a protocol where, for example, if let's say that I'm a major esports league or tournament organizer, and I want to enable my community to basically um, dive into these brackets and kind of create those fantasy sports play around my tournament. Are you guys looking to open this up in the future for more people to leverage that infrastructure?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a little bit more challenging with the like season long fantasy leagues, like the
Sure.
fantasy football league, because you have this component of having to mint individual players. But the bracket non fungible brackets, and this is why we chose to name it something that was a little bit broader because it isn't just for
Yep.
the NCAA basketball tournament. It's for different sports, but then also our long-term vision is to turn it into a protocol so that anyone can create their own brackets or tournaments or pools, and you can have multiple bracket pools within the non-fungible bracket app that for the same tournament, right, for the World Cup. Because what's very common is people creating their own little private office pool, or a group of friends doing it, or like you said, or different leagues. And it also means you can decide, you can use different tokens as the reward. So a protocol, like a community, can decide to set up a bracket tournament using their governance token, and the winners win their governance token. And it doesn't have to be
Yep.
the token that we use in our protocol. So it absolutely that is our long term goal for it. And I think that's important because it's sort of why are we putting we're putting the resources and time to develop this, not just for we're not just doing it for like the NCAA tournament, right? That's such a
Sure.
small piece. We want to be doing this for something much larger.
Love it. No, I'm definitely with you, and I think it makes all the sense in the world. And I also think that kind of the timing is also right because we had, I mean, not sure if this comparison is going to be completely relevant, but this kind of falls within the realm of prediction markets and as much as entertainment and fantasy sports. And there have been attempts for prediction markets on Ethereum or on the blockchains, I think since 2017, and actually none of them picked up too much traction. And to their defense, I think they were just way ahead of their time and a bit premature. And now I think the basically the big piece of the puzzle that was missing was actually the NFTs and kind of like the mainstream understanding and hype around that, and how those tie within the entertainment space. So I think the timing is great, and I'm looking forward to see this vision actually come into to reality.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, a big piece to LeagueDAO and why we wanted to, part at least for me personally, why I was so driven by this concept to, and to help to bring this to life was there's so many parallels, and this is kind of sort of underneath a lot of it. The original concept for the LeagueDAO League came from me looking at Pool Together and that sort of
Yep.
user experience, but then also just using DeFi apps in general. And one of the key things that I think goes a little unstated is the fact that if you can participate in our fantasy league, you've minting a player, having the player in your wallet, connecting your wallet, staking the player in the league to set your lineup, unstaking to withdraw them and claiming your rewards at the end of the week. All of these user steps and actions are the actions you need to use DeFi. So, but we're couching these under the umbrella of a game and something that is entertaining and something that is familiar to a lot of people who aren't Web3 savvy or experienced with it. So really see fantasy, these fantasy gaming as an onboard and an on ramp for a lot of people into the world of DeFi and Web3. And so I think that's, it's taking these bigger concepts, but then applying them into a framework that is, around entertainment that people like. Part of the thing for me with the non-fungible brackets is you look at the NCAA men's tournament, there are millions of people that fill out a bracket every year. Even if you don't really follow sports, it's still a cultural moment that people like to participate in. And the user flow to mint a bracket with non-fungible brackets, it still feels like what you're used to doing with creating a bracket, in Web 2. And so we're using that UI to effectively onboard people into the ecosystem. And I think that's what we need as a whole,
Yep.
because the UI is a challenge for a lot of people,
For sure.
that are trying to come in. But you can, it's not just improving the UI with, DeFi and other apps. It's also finding ways for people to feel comfortable with it, where it's like they don't even know that they're becoming comfortable with it, right? Like you're kind of
Yep.
tricking them into it.
Love it. And you mentioned that basically you kind of not got the idea, but something which pushed you in this direction was the baseball card collection. Obviously, we've now had for the last 1 or 2 years kind of like what used to be baseball card was now on the blockchain with NBA Top Shot. And we're seeing this across different sports leagues. For example, there's now Top Shots for the UFC and stuff like that. So, though this is the collectible aspect of it, you guys are building the fantasy sports aspect of it. What else are you excited to see, or are you looking to basically see in the space in terms of the intersection of sports and Web3, apart from those two use cases?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple areas. I think one, fantasy, I think also ties into just gaming.
Yeah.
And and the larger kind of play to earn gaming, but even beyond that, it's kind of what makes fantasy sports fun is at the end of the day, it's also like the community experience of it, and like being a part of a league, and trying to get people to trade players with you, and there's just like there's a larger community experience around it that I think fantasy and gaming plays into, that just sort of the like collectible side doesn't necessarily play into, in my opinion, just with like sports.
Yeah.
So I think there's a couple areas that are fascinating to me. I think one is just the continued evolution of like the metaverse, and I think that's something that for us at LeagueDAO we are pretty passionate about and want and have plans and intend to grow into and to further build into. But it's looking at, we talk to people in our community. It's like, is there a virtual space where we can all come together to watch a game together, right? Like, I think if anything, the past few years where there's been more isolation, it's, I haven't had the chance to go and watch the Major League Baseball playoffs at the bar that I always go to with my friends, and so I think that collective experience, but in a digital way, that's a big piece of sports and fandom. And I think fantasy sports, it's a lot of watching sports, but being able to watch that and engage with other people. So I think that's with Web3. I think the continued sort of growth of the metaverse is going to play into that. But I think also there's a gaming aspect, so that you're able to like play actual games with other people too, beyond just sort of your fantasy team. So that's one piece. And then I think the other that it was just something that I glanced over with LeagueDAO, but is a very important part of LeagueDAO is that LeagueDAO is a DAO, right? It is a
Yep.
decentralized organization. We are DAO first. So, it is truly a community run project. It is not, run by some centralized, underlying business entity. And that's something that I'm passionate about and really with this project. And I know co-founders also wanted to do that. And, they've experience with building DAOs and being a part of them and contributing to them. And a lot of that comes out of what we saw in 2017, 2018 with a lot of projects that had great ideas of decentralization, but ultimately were still just centralized companies.
Yeah,
But I think DAOs also become very interesting with sports and decentralizing community ownership. And I think that's a piece to sports that we're still very early into, but I think it's something that creates a lot of opportunities to address some of these bigger picture stuff, issues around sports in general.
for sure. And this, I think, this is a great segue to my next two questions. So the first one is obviously League DAO. You guys are building this in a DAO first way. Something which we've also done at Enter DAO. We love the approach. But what, from your point of view, what of the pros of going DAO first? And this also poses certain challenges. What are the pros and what are the challenges of building products DAO first?
I mean, I think the pros are, I think you're tapping into from day one more collective feedback and information and communication. So, and I think from this, just from like the lean startup, right? Like the agile
Yeah.
startup methodology, like that I think a lot of us come out of. It's being able to get real time feedback by your actual users, right? And use that to inform the product you're building, to make rapid changes to that product when you release it. And so the DAO first model really helps with that because you have a community of people that are, that are have a stake in this project, but also because they just enjoy it, right? And they want to use the product. And so you're able to get a lot more feedback from your core user base a lot faster. And I think that actually positions a lot of these DAO first projects to have better long term success because we can realize, it's sort of like when you're just sort of have like a startup and you're building a product, you become so isolated and so siloed into like these are the things we want, but you need to be constantly checking and engaging and getting feedback. And the DAO first model not only enables that but also requires it, right? Like you
Yep.
have to be transparent with your community, so
Yep.
you get a lot more feedback out of it, which can be problematic to some degree. You have to kind of know how to harness that and use it the right way, but also it opens up opportunities that I think, in my experience, working in companies where it's like, well, we're going to build this and then we'll release it and then we'll see what people think, and like there's just such a disconnect between the people using the product and the actual company building it, and the DAO first model helps sort of disrupt that. And then I would say it's also, I mean, fundamentally, the fact that the people that are using your product, your early adopters, are like they're in a part of the protocol and they have a stake in the protocol, and so you're not just asking people to use stuff out of altruism. And that's one of just sort of the Web 2 models that just
Yeah.
drives me crazy. Is like every startup's just asking people to like, can you be a beta tester? Can you try this? And it's like, we all, I think a lot of us probably were early adopters in a lot of products over the past
Yep.
decade, and what you don't really have like out of it, like oh,
Get
I
this
did,
Amazon voucher.
yeah, exactly. Like I just made more money for Mark Zuckerberg, right? Like, so I think that's a big part. And I think the challenges are, and there are a lot of challenges to it, right? It's not I would
Yeah.
say the DAO model, the DAO first model is not like a panacea, right? That will solve everything and that every project should pursue. I don't think it makes sense for every project. But I think because you do have to be more transparent. You have to and things might take a little bit longer because you can't just sort of do it. You have you have to run stuff by the community. You have to let the community weigh in and vote on things. And so that is I think for some people that's just too burdensome. And maybe not as conducive, but I think I'm personally a big fan of it.
Yep.
It's still a very new space and new model, and there's gonna be continue to be growing pains. But I think that's part of the what's fun about it, and what's exciting about it too. So I mean, I love the model, but it's also still very very early. So we'll see, 10 years from now if it was the right decision.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I'm all for going down first, obviously. Also think we're still really, really early, missing tremendous amount of infrastructure and tooling around that. And one of also the distractions, which I guess comes with it, I mean, obviously getting all these community feedback is great, but and all this could also, I mean, I've been in the crypto space for quite some time and I'm pretty much numb to it, but for certain teams, having a token since day one and having a community around this token can also be a distraction
Oh yeah.
because it kind of could create a disconnect between building the product itself and the token price and everything. So this is something for builders to also take into account.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think fortunately, like you said, like I think we've been in the space for a while and have been a part of projects where, like I said, working at companies that came out of the 2017,
Yeah.
2016 ICOs, like, and where it just seemed like every time you tried to talk to the community, all they cared about was the token price. And it's like, but at the same time, you're just focusing on building a product like that,
Yep.
and like at the end of the day, that's a subject matter that we really just try to, we definitely don't engage with it. We don't because the token has a purpose, right?
Yep.
It was we the reason why we launched the League governance token from day one was because it is the engine that powers the governance
Yep.
of the actual protocol, and the mechanism for people to vote on what are we doing, what are we using our resources on, what are some of the, especially with fantasy sports, there's just so many like minutia, right? Like even like the rules or how this season how are we going to do this, stuff like that. And there's some stuff where we can have the forum and make decisions more rapidly, but and not don't necessarily have to go through a full community vote. But it the token had a purpose from day one, and that's
Yep.
what we really focus on. And we're going to continue to build out more utility for the token. And I think the more you do that, I think the more it helps sort of push aside these the people that are really just coming in looking at from pure speculation. Because and I think that's the other thing, you really get a sense of, again with the DAO first model, it's like you really understand who's actually there to help build the protocol or who's just speculating, right, and like looking for information on a token.
Yeah. 100%.
It's sort of, you've seen a lot of communities where they grow, the Discord grows massively and there's 10,000 people and it's this whole there's just so much noise, but when you really look under the hood, it's really just people that are just want to know about
Yep.
the price, right? Like, why is
Yep.
the price up, why is the price down? What we've been able to do is, I mean, we've just, because how we engage with the community, I feel like the people that are in the Discord are people that actually care about the protocol and what we're building and aren't just there for speculation. And that's, but you do have to kind of, see through the weeds a little bit. But once you do that, you uncover the people that actually are going to help. And I think that's also another part of the DAO first model is you build this community of people that, from day one, that are passionate about what you're building and really exciting. And that creates an openness that allows talent to come through as well. I think some of the people that we brought onto the core team have been specifically from emerged from the community, and that's been
Yep.
massive for us because
Likewise. Yeah.
yeah, it's people that are already just passionate about this and
Yeah.
and are spending time, so it becomes a no-brainer to bring them on, to enable them to spend more of their time to help build the overall project.
For sure. Love it. No, we're big fans of that. Also, hired a bunch of people off our Discord. Saw that you guys did the same. Love that you guys onboarded Benji, who's also in quite active in the space. Shout out to Benji. While we're talking DAO, I guess my last question was, what's the? I mean, by limit, I mean sky's the limit, obviously, but how far can DAOs go into the sports space? I guess the biggest thing would be for a DAO to at some point own a sport franchise in whichever league. I'm not sure how far we are from that. Maybe first step would be a stadium. I know Mike Judas is working with Links DAO to basically tokenize a golf course. How far can DAOs go into the sports world, in your opinion?
I mean, I think you bring up, I think, a really exciting model is like DAOs owning actual like real world sports franchises, which is pretty fascinating. I think there's mechanisms to make that, to enable that, as we've seen, right? I think LinkStyle is a great example, right? But I also know, I think the challenge with sports is, depending on the sport, you have owners that are tied to a larger like league structure, and then there's a commissioner, and a lot of professional sports leagues are very top down, top heavy, and
Yeah.
you have these like small pool of the existing owners and commissioners that control who gets to buy teams, who gets to join this club of owners, if you will,
Yeah.
and then ultimately decide to determine what owners can do, can or cannot do. And I think that is why it's also that's going to be the hurdle, the challenge to for DAOs owning teams. But I also think that is part of the reason why it is needed. And I think that also the sort of DAOs create a a system and an infrastructure for community ownership, right? That didn't exist previously. That's really what like community ownership has existed for a long time. People believe in it, but there wasn't a mechanism that in place to really enable that. And this is what DAOs do, right? Like the software, the governance software, and all that stuff. It
Yep.
actually makes that possible. So now we have like the tools to maybe for this community ownership mechanism and to work more effectively. And I think that also opens up opportunities for diversifying and creating, you know, diversifying in the sense of like creating a more diverse population of people owning franchises and teams,
Yep.
and opening the pool so you have different voices coming in. And I think that also addresses some of the larger kind of inequalities with professional sports that are very real, right? And so it's I think there's a lot that can come from the emergence of DAOs owning sports franchises. I think it in teams, and I think that's a really exciting place to watch and to see how that grows and emerges. I think different sports probably lend itself a little bit better to it than, because I
Yeah.
think that's also where a community of owners can also bring something and bring added value to a team. I mean, if the team's been owned by the same family forever and they're sort of stagnant, I think there's a lot of like European soccer clubs that kind of, or football
Yep.
clubs that kind of are in that place, and bringing fresh energy and innovation to it can there's a real opportunity for those clubs to then grow and to maybe they've been relegated, and to bring in new resources, and help them sort of, advance to the next sort of league, and things like that. So I think it, I think it's it's only a matter of time, in my opinion, before we see this happen. You're seeing some early kind of iterations with more advanced kind of forward thinking, like new sports initiatives, like fan
Mhm.
control football, and what they're doing, which is really exciting to watch. But I think what's going to be really the big one is going to be seeing a DAO buy a team in an existing sports league,
Yeah,
that has been around for a while, and then going up and and engaging with and working with the sort of traditional legacy owners.
yep,
Who knows? Maybe that'll be LeagueDAO one day. I think if it is, we've done something right.
yeah. I definitely hope so, and super excited to see how the space develops. Um, Also, I definitely enjoyed this talk. I'll keep it at that, so we don't keep the episode too long. Also, to be conscious of your time, I appreciate you coming on the show. Everyone, check out LeagueDAO on Twitter. Join the Discord. March Madness is coming soon, so
Yeah,
keep an eye
NFT,
on
non-fungible
NFB,
brackets.
non-fungible brackets. Started off with March Madness, and then the sky's the limit for that. Thank you, Jake. Appreciate the show, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you. My pleasure.